All right, how's it going, y'all? So today we're talking about Xen Orchestra and XC-PNG, which is what runs my entire office network, all my virtual machines, and it's completely open source and I don't pay a dime for it. It is a phenomenal product that allows you to scale out and build multiple servers, all with a really easy single pane of glass to manage everything, all completely self-hosted, and it's also got enterprise options available for full support. So at any given time, I've got dozens of virtual machines running, all doing various things. I've got an internally written client CRM that runs off of a database and Django server that I set up and runs. I've got DNS running. I have a backup server that runs mini-IO that clients hit to back up their servers. I have tons of it, and it's all managed across now 3 different physical hosts. I just bought a new R630. It was like $300, and it's got 2 14-core multi-threaded CPUs in there for a total of 56 sockets. And honestly, it took me like an hour to set the entire thing on up and upgrade a new version of XC-PNG. And that is how easy this system is to use, because once you've got it set up, adding in additional servers and moving servers around and different virtual machines around is incredibly easy. And so this is my setup, and I've even got the option to run high availability, which is great. Okay, so before we dive super deep into this and how I'm all set up with it, what is virtualization and what is a virtual machine? And this is absolutely something I recommend everybody do when they buy a server, is instead of actually installing that server bare metal, what's called, set up what's called a hypervisor on it. So then instead of directly installing either like Linux or Windows directly on the physical machine, you put a little layer in between. That's that virtualization layer. And so you install actually like XC-PNG or another hypervisor directly on that physical server. And then you install Windows on top of that as a virtual machine. Now let's say you need another server. Say you need a Linux server. Say you need a Windows server. Say you want to separate stuff on out. Previously, if you just had that one server, you had 2 choices. If you were installing Windows directly on that server and all of a sudden you need to do something else, well, now you run it on there as well. So you would have like maybe your Unify controller on there as well as your domain controller. But now you've got a problem where if you've got to reboot one, you have to reboot them all. And it's also hard to do a backup and a restore. So if you have to restore one, it restores all. And that's just one of the many issues that comes with installing a lot of services on a physical host. Instead, what you want to do is separate that stuff on out, and so everything's nice and neatly isolated. And so for me, every time I spin up a new thing, I spin up a new virtual machine. And now, if I break that virtual machine, I've broken nothing but that one thing, and I can restore just that one thing. You can set everything up perfectly for that exact task, and even include and move different networks around to your heart's content. Virtualization is so useful to have because it allows you to do backups incredibly easily, where you can back up your entire environment and restore it to different places with ease. And it also gets you that isolation. Say you get hacked, say one of your services get hacked because it was not secure for whatever reason. With virtual machines, it's just that one thing instead of the entire server and everything else on there. The list goes on and on and on, and once you have the ability to just trivially spin up virtual machines, you find so many use cases for them, and you can just spin up new operating systems in the blink of an eye to do whatever you need and then wipe them off the face of the planet in a heartbeat as well. It makes it just so easy, and the backup and restore function is something I cannot stress enough. Did you know that you or I could go to any data broker's website today and buy anyone's personal data? It's on us to protect our personal data, and that's why I use today's sponsor, Aura. Aura keeps you safe online by doing all the hard work for you. Aura monitors data brokers who are selling your personal information and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. This will then keep your personal information off these sites, which will help protect you from identity theft, scams, and even spam. One of my favorite parts of using Aura is the massive reduction in spam calls that I used to get. Aura will also continuously monitor the dark web and alert you if they find your personal information. They even have a credit monitoring tool and will alert you if anybody tries to access your credit or your bank accounts. Plus, they give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case happen. Aura is easy to set up and use, and it provides all of these services and more, including a password manager, VPN, and antivirus, all included at one low price. Stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches and brokers. Check out my link in the description below, aura.com/spacerex, to get a free 14-day trial and see if any of your personal information has been exposed. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring this section of the video. Now back to the video. All right, so that's what virtualization is. Instead of actually having all your things run on physical servers, there's a little layer of abstraction that let you run multiple copies of any operating system all in parallel. So you can have 15 different copies of Linux all running on one physical host, and they share the CPU. So if 14 of them are not doing anything, you can allow that 15th one to use the entire CPU. There is a little difference with the RAM. RAM is set up where each device gets its own RAM and that's it. But for the most part, resources are shared. Same thing with disk activity. And so that is what virtual machines are. They are, for all intents and purposes, physical machines that just happen to be running on the same hardware. And so they're totally isolated from each other and can even have their own network cards and things like that. I go more in depth into what virtual machines are in other videos. This is really focused on Xen Orchestra and how I use it with XC-PNG, and really the implementation of it to see exactly what you're able to do. So throughout the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking about two things: Xen Orchestra and XC-PNG. And I will in some ways use them interchangeably, and I apologize for that. They really are part of a stack that go together, but what XC-PNG is it is the thing that you physically install on the server. It is what is known as the hypervisor. So if you have 12 servers, you have 12 copies of XC-PNG. When I say servers, I'm going to be talking about bare metal hardware, physical servers, and then virtual machines are guests. So basically, you've got XC-PNG, and that's what actually does everything. That's what runs the virtual machines. That's what does all of these settings that allow you to be able to have all of these virtual machines. But your only interface with XC-PNG would be command line. And that is where Xen Orchestra comes in. Xen Orchestra acts as a controller for all of your XC-PNG hosts. So essentially, it is just a beautiful settings window that allows you to monitor, create virtual machines, move virtual machines around, back up virtual machines. It allows you to control XC-PNG without having to type any commands whatsoever. It is all just based off of a nice, really easy to use user interface. And so they really go together. So whenever I'm talking about XC-PNG or Xen, they are really interlinked, and XC-PNG is the actual bare metal server that does all the things, and then Xen Orchestra is what runs on top of it and controls it, and that's what you actually interface with. I do use them interchangeably in a lot of ways, and I apologize. XC-PNG is actually an open source fork from Citrix Xen server, one of those cases that Broadcom just went through. Essentially, Citrix had a very good pricing model, and then all of a sudden they made it way, way, way more expensive in a short amount of time. And so what they did is they took that Citrix Xen server and migrated it and created this thing called XC-PNG that is open source and anybody can run. So that is one of the really nice things whenever we're talking about things like this is the support and pricing is optional. If you want to have support and pay, you absolutely can. But because this is fully open source, if you go down a path and say, you know, this is getting too expensive, they're trying to lock me into expensive pricing, you can just walk away. That's because all this software is open source and self-hostable. So even for enterprises who do want to pay for that support, there is an additional option there of knowing that it is optional and your entire software stack does not rely on a bill that you don't control. Both Broadcom, who bought VMware, and Citrix Xen server went through major price increases in a very short amount of time to get more money out of their clients. And so having open source software running your entire host is really, really valuable because now you can get out of it. And so that is why I like Xen Orchestra and XC-PNG. It's got great features while also having that assurance where you can self-host it. Even if you want to pay for support, you know there's always that option out there further on down the line that you just did not get with VMware, where they changed the pricing. You either have to leave their services and migrate somewhere else or pay the increased price. All right, so that's the quick overview of what XC-PNG and Xen Orchestra are. So now with all that out of the way, let's see how I'm set up with Xen Orchestra. So this right here is my web interface of Xen Orchestra. So Xen Orchestra runs as another virtual machine on XC-PNG. So you actually control it through another virtual machine directly on there. And there's an open source script that you can download and run from GitHub that will build this all for you and build the entire web interface for you and update it all without having to pay for support. But if you are looking to use this in enterprise, they also have a fully supported version that you can download all the features. And so because I have self-hosted it, I get this message right here. And when we log in, this is the screen we're brought to. We can see all the different running virtual machines, as well as what physical host they're running on. And so the way Xen Orchestra works is servers are set up into two different layers. First off, we have our physical hosts. So if I have 12 physical servers, I will have 12 physical hosts. Then every single host is part of a pool. So here are my hosts. And so I've got 3 hosts, but only 2 pools. The reason for that is this actually allows you to pool resources together. And so let's say you've got 12 R630s who all have similar network cards and CPUs. Well, you can actually put those all in the exact same pool, and now resources are fully shared between them. You can set up high availability where one of those physical hosts can get unplugged and totally go down, and all the virtual machines running on it will automatically start up and hardly have noticed a difference on the next server. You can also set up where there is a live migration where the server never shuts down and just boom, switches over all without powering off. There's a lot of very powerful stuff you can do with pools. And so you can see within my R630 pool, I have the 2 different hosts, the one I started with and my newer one. And that's why it was so easy to add my new R630 to this. I just added it to this pool, and all the network interfaces, because they were in the same order, just carried on over. And my NFS server that runs these virtual machines just added it as well. It was incredibly easy, and that is the power of pools as well as other things. So let's say I've got a VM running on, let's say I've got this Nextcloud instance right here. And on the far right, we can see it's running on my new R630, that's VM03, on the pool R630. So now let's say I need to move this to VM01. That's my older server for whatever reason. I've just got this migrate button where I can just run it to VM01 and choose my migration network. That's basically what's going to sync the RAM and stuff across. And the whole time, this server is staying up. It does not shut down. It doesn't notice anything. Nextcloud the entire time is fully accessible. All it's doing is right now, it is basically syncing over the RAM in between these two and all the states. And then because this happens to have a disk on shared storage, so it's actually on an NFS server, it just has to move the RAM over. And all of a sudden, it's just running on the next server without shutting down. So I can look and see this task over here. Oh, is it already done? Oh, yep. So in genuinely 30 seconds, you can migrate between them. So that's because they're in the exact same pool and the disk is on NFS. You can still migrate between pools, but it does have to shut down. And depending on where the storage was, it would have to migrate that as well. I can do the same thing with a disk migration. So if you look right here, I have a 100 gigabyte hard drive plugged into this Nextcloud server. So that is just basically a virtual disk that I've got access to. Right now, you can see it's running on this FSO2. That is my TrueNAS server. And if I wanted to, I could take it and I could move that hard drive from being on NFS to move it to the actual local hard drive running on the server. And once again, the entire time, this is done asynchronously, and the server stays running the entire time. There's so many powerful features here that make it so useful. When we're talking about storage, there's really two different types. There's local storage, and that's like hard drives and SSDs plugged directly into the actual server that obviously only one host can access. And then there is networked storage. Network storage is going to be your iSCSI and your NFS. For me, I use NFS. And that shared storage is what goes to a NAS. So I've got my TrueNAS server that has a bunch of SSDs in it and exports an NFS share directly into my server right here. And so I can have all of these different hosts all accessing the exact same storage, and that is why the migrations are so fast. All the disks are not in the actual servers. Instead, they are located in my NAS, and they boot directly off of that. And so you've got centralized storage for all of it. And so when you're deploying super scalable servers like this, you'll have your NFS servers be high available. So essentially, if one of these NFS servers goes down, within a minute, it'll switch on over to a synced second one that is fully high available. And that way, your VMs will just keep running. Then you'll have the same thing with high availability with your hosts. And you'll also have high availability finally with all the switches. So with this kind of setup, you can have a fully redundant network stack that can survive any single piece going down, all without having to configure your virtual machines with anything special. They just keep running and don't really know what happened, but they just know that everything has been fine. Okay, so I want to show one more thing before we go to what I think might be Xen Orchestra's best feature, and that is the incredible backups. And that is just how we can build VMs. First, I choose what pool I'd like it on. I'll go with the R630. And this is where I've got the option to just use a template. So what I do is I go ahead and I build out a virtual machine with the operating system I like. So this Ubuntu 24 template. What this is this has all my SSH keys set up. This has my Zabbix configuration ready to go. So it reaches out to my Zabbix server and says, hey, I exist now. It has everything ready to go. So building it takes 2 seconds. I just have to give it a name. So I've got the name, I can choose the performance. And really, that's split up into your CPU cores and your RAM. If you think about it, you can have 12 different programs running on your computer, and they might have multiple threads going, but if they're not doing anything, the other programs can use them. That's the exact same way that CPU cores work whenever you're virtualizing. Right now, there's a chart in here somewhere that says I have allocated 5 times as many CPU cores as I have. And that's okay. That's because 99% of the time, most of my virtual machines are not doing any heavy lifting. And so while they're not doing anything, they're not taking up those CPU cores. And so when you set your virtual CPUs, you can just set them to whatever you'd like. And as long as the actual host you're putting it on has enough of those threads, it'll work. Now, RAM is different. RAM is not shared. RAM, there are ways of sharing it where basically if a server is not using a bunch of RAM, it can have its RAM shrunk. I don't recommend that. There's a performance implications with that and some things like that. Realistically, when you're setting up RAM for virtual machines, it is fixed. So if this server takes 8 gigs of RAM, it is 8 gigs of RAM on the host, and that's taken away and nobody else can use it. So CPUs are shared, RAM is not. And then finally, the last 2 things we've got options for are the interfaces. So I have multiple VLANs across a lot of different options depending on what networking needs to touch. And this is where you can choose which VLAN to associate it on. And so I can have multiple network interfaces, and so maybe it needs an NFS share. Well, I've got a special NFS VLAN that only certain VMs have access to. And that can all be done through here and have multiple interfaces. Finally, your disk. Right now, it's fixed at this 20 gigabytes because of the way I've set it up. And it's actually going to do what's called a fast clone, but it can all be increased later on. And you can also choose where you would like it. Finally, the last thing you can see down here is this option called Fast Clone, which is great. Fast Clone will actually clone the existing disk as a new virtual machine. So even though this has a 20 gig disk and maybe 5 gigabytes of it's used, that initial place will not be duplicated. And so it is an instantaneous deduplication, and you'll see the VM starts up in seconds because it already exists and it doesn't have to copy data over. Instead, it just does a really quick clone. And we can see already our console is coming up, and we'll be able to log into this in a second. We can also see that we've got easy stats right here. We can see how much CPU we're using, our network throughput, and our disk throughput. And here we plug into basically a VGA or a screen. This is the output of it, just virtualized. If I had GPUs as well, you can do a thing called GPU pass-through, where you can actually stick a GPU directly into a system. So if you want to do something like a video editing server or need transcoding or some other GPU accelerated workflow, you can actually virtually assign a GPU directly into this box. And for Windows machines with XC-PNG 8.3, we now have the ability to create virtual TPMs for Windows 11. And we can also pass through other PCI devices as well. Now we're booted on up. We have total control over the system, and we can migrate it, we can clone it, we can do whatever we need. You can also take snapshots, and so that way, if you're about to make a huge update to something and you want a quick and easy way of rolling back, you can take a snapshot, try your update, even try the update on a clone of your system, and if it goes poorly, well, just roll back the snapshot, and if it goes well, keep it. There's so many great things you can do whenever you're virtualizing, and I'm now just getting to what I think is the single best, and that is the backups. Xen Orchestra has the best virtual machine backups out there, built directly in my opinion. I have this set up where it automatically backs up all of my VMs to my NAS every single night. And the restore functionality is awesome. I already mentioned how you've got that ability to restore snapshots, but here there is so much more you can do. If you wanted to, you could take a copy of this virtual machine, and I've done this with clients to make sure everything's working, and you can send a link to that backup. I can put it on my Xen Orchestra, start up that VM as if it was always there. I can go ahead and choose, all right, let's say client backup. I can restore this from any time I want to, on any machine I want to. They also have the ability to have what's called a restore check, where it boots up the VM in a virtual network that it can't access anything else, and make sure that the restore works. It is incredibly powerful and so easy to use. If you have an unexpected crash or somebody configures the wrong thing, having an easy rollback is so nice to have. And you can also use this to do cross-site replications. So you can use these same backup options to send it from site A to site B, which is great for migrations. There's so much stuff that you can do here, and it is so easy to set up these backups. Whenever you're setting them up, you've got different options where you can choose now how many daily versions, weekly, monthly, and yearly versions to have. You can choose how long you would want to do a full backup for, how many you'd like to do at the same time, which VMs you would like to do, where you'd like to do it. So now they've also got proxies, so you can have 50 different sites all coming into one Xen Orchestra setup that are all controlled in a single pane of glass. There is just so many options here, and honestly, the capability to backup, restore, and migrate that virtual machines give you is one of the best reasons to use it. It just allows you to be able to restore an entire server exactly as it was from a couple of days ago, and even upgrading, now you just migrate your VM and you can upgrade a lot of time without even shutting the VM down, because now it's just existing on a new host and the RAM sunk over. There's so much stuff you can do with this, and I'm planning on doing a few more deep dives into Xen Orchestra. So put any of those questions down in the comments below for what you'd like to see. But it's absolutely worth checking out. Its number one competitor is going to be Proxmox. Both of them are free and open source. I think Proxmox is a little bit more home labby, and I think Xen Orchestra is a little bit more enterprise. But for the most part, both of them can suit your needs. The huge advantage that Xen Orchestra has over Proxmox is the backups. Having that open source backup option that's just directly integrated into everything is why I ended up going with Xen Orchestra over Proxmox. There is a backup option with Proxmox, but it's just not the same with Delta backups and stuff directly integrated with everything. All right, well, that's going to be it for this. If you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And if you have any questions, put those down in the comments below. And have a good one. Bye.